Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So the purpose of today's workshop is how to make the most of your time at the consultation. We'll go through what you need to do prior to the consultation and what we expect and what actually happens at the consultation. My name is Pete. I'm one of 4 consultants at the Writing Center. So this is the agenda for this afternoon's workshop. We'll talk about the consultations, how you prepare for the consultation, and the sort of problems, the typical problems that we find, and how we get over them. So the Academic Writing Center has a team of many people, but there are 4 consultants who you can make appointments to see to discuss your text. Now, there are two of us who are British. One is native Russian, but he spent a lot of time studying and working in the US, so he's near native. And there's another guy who is from the Southern Hemisphere, Australia and New Zealand. So if we look at the policy of the Academic Writing Center, it makes it clear that we do not proofread texts. This is not a proofreading session. This is a consultation. We also do not guarantee publication of your article, right? We don't know what's being said. So the purpose of the consultation is to help you develop your writing, to help you develop as writers. Now, people come to see us for one of several reasons. Firstly, they come to see us because they want to have an article published in a journal somewhere. It may be that they are contributing or writing a book, so they want us to review a chapter or something. It may be that they are attending a conference and they have to either give a presentation at the conference or that they have to defend some research at a conference. So there are several reasons why they come. So what you actually do, go to the website if you want to have a consultation, register, and you will be asked to submit the text in advance. And this will be filed in a common area where at the consultation, both I or one of my colleagues and you, the author, or you and your co-authors can view and edit the text together. So we will go through it together. But we'll talk about what you need to do in advance of the meeting. But the instructions to actually register are quite clear. At this point, it's worth mentioning that sometimes we get somebody who registers for a consultation with us and they say, yes, I need to publish it by 5 o'clock tonight. It's crazy. It doesn't work like that. If they have a 30 or 50 page manuscript that they want us to go through and we've got an hour to do it, it's not going to work. So give it plenty of time, at least until you are familiar with the time it takes to process the text. It depends on your level, what you're trying to achieve. Sometimes we can do 5 pages an hour, sometimes we can do 20 pages in an hour. It depends on the text and the purpose. So before you come to us, have an idea of the journal in which you're going to publish. Now, this is very important because each journal has its own publishing guidelines. Some journals are based in the US, and some are based in Europe, and some are based in Russia, and some are based elsewhere in the world. Each journal is under the control of its own editor, its own chief editor. There may be several editors, but there will be a chief editor who decides what goes in the journal and what standards it conforms to. So you need to know which journal and what that particular journal's publishing guidelines tell you, right? So you need to be aware of the structure of your text. There will be instructions that talk about how you should put references in your text, how you should put acknowledgements in your text, how you should start your abstract, how many words there should be in the abstract, what sequence happens after the abstract, the introduction and the layout and so on. We don't get involved in the structure of the text because we don't need to know those aspects of the publishing guidelines. I'll come to what we do need to know in a minute, right? But make sure that you are familiar with what the journal is expecting from you so that you can pass on the relevant information to us. Now, there are some links in this slide to aids which can help you. Obviously, if you are using Microsoft Word, then there is a spell checker in it, and you can change the dictionary to whether it's UK English or whether it's US English, and so on. And you can switch on the grammar checker, and you can say whether you want strict grammar or whatever. Another software application of choice for researchers is to use LaTeX, and that has its own separate tools and advantages and disadvantages. Now, one thing that I do strongly recommend is that you have a good dictionary at your disposal. And what I use, and I had these physical volumes while I was in the UK a long time ago, is the Oxford English Dictionary. This version is the shorter Oxford English Dictionary. It's only 2 volumes as opposed to the complete Oxford English Dictionary, which is 10 volumes. This is a mere 600,000 words. And the 2 volumes that I had, I used to use with great pleasure, filling out, completing many crosswords and everything else. There was never anything that I needed which wasn't in these 2 volumes. So I strongly recommend that you get the shorter Oxford English Dictionary, and you can get it online. You can use it. You can have it embedded in an application called WordWeb, and the link to WordWeb is here. I've expanded it so that you can see it clearly. You can enter that in, and you need the basic WordWeb package or WordWeb Pro package, and the shorter Oxford English Dictionary is an add-on. It's not too expensive. The whole thing comes at under 6,000 rubles, which isn't too expensive. There's a potential problem, and I don't know because I've already got it, so I've not tried buying it since recent activities. So I don't know if card payments work or whatever. But if you do want to get it and you are struggling to buy it online, then you will receive my email address in these presentation slides, so you can get in touch with me and I'll help that along. So this is what the Oxford English Dictionary looks like once you've installed it on your computer. You have, I've pointed out that it's an SOED tab because it's embedded in the WordWeb application. I've highlighted the sound tab, so you get pronunciation of a word. Pronunciation is very important, and particularly if you are giving a presentation or whatever. Whilst it is the Oxford English Dictionary, you can change, there are regional settings, so why I don't understand anybody would want to, but you can have it so that you've got American pronunciation instead of British pronunciation. And the arrow at the bottom indicates the origin of words. I studied Latin at school, so it's always helped with my vocabulary. And we can see whether a word generally originates from Greek or Latin, or occasionally French or German. And these are the 4 main languages that constitute the history of the English language. Okay, so you've written your text and you've made your appointment and you have identified the journal that you're hoping to publish, and obviously if it's a conference that you're attending, then you can tell us that as we meet. So at the start of the first consultation, and hopefully there will be many, maybe with different text, you may only have a short text which we can manage in one consultation, but you will have other texts. But at the start of the first consultation, over a piece of text, I will ask you to tell me what the text is about. I want to know why you've written it. I want to understand what's going on, because if I understand, then I can help you better. So I want to know what the text is about, and I want to know the journal, right? Whether it's an American journal or a British journal, because the spelling's important, right? So the journals, the publishing guidelines, they will say you must write using British English, or you must write using American English, or you can use either, right? Have a choice. But they never say you can use both. So if they don't say anything, you need to make a decision whether you expect it to be a largely British or Commonwealth audience, or whether it's going to be American. Other specifications typically will include whether you want the active voice, or whether the chief editor wants the active voice or the passive voice. And that's down to the writing style. They will also ask, particularly as you are quoting as authors, they say you should write in the first person or you should write in the third person. So we will ask these questions, both me and my colleagues. Then it says that I will explain the benefits to you of you reading the text out loud, because we are going to ask you to read the text out loud. We've got the text in front of us. We can read it, but you're going to read it out loud. To reiterate, this is a consultation. It's not a proofreading. And this gives us the opportunity, it gives me an opportunity to process, to input the text in two ways. So I get it through audio and I get it through visual input. And it gives me a better chance to understand what you're trying to say, how you're trying to say it, so that I can make suggestions for you to improve it. It also gives you an opportunity to deliver the text in the way that you want it to be received. Now, if this is at a conference and you are making an impassioned plea for something, then you will put stress, you'll put intonation, you will pause for effects. Silence is a wonderful, powerful tool. And if it's just the medium of writing, then this correlates to punctuation. This is the purpose of commas, full stops, paragraphs, and everything else, exclamation marks even, bold, underlined, right? So it gives you the opportunity to deliver your text in the way that you want it to be received. If the journal is European, which language should we use, British or American? As I say, the journal guidelines should tell you. And if the journal guidelines don't tell you, then you are fortunate, you have a choice. You can use either British or American. I would always recommend using British, and I would say if it's Italian, then it's European and British is closer. But if they do not say, and you must check the publishing guidelines for the journal, if they do not say, then you have a choice. But you must make a decision, because you cannot use both, right? Because an editor will reject it if you are spelling words both using British style and American style. So it's important that you understand why we ask you to read the text out loud. And the first time somebody is asked, I occasionally get raised eyebrows or shock or horror. And it's understandable that English isn't your native language, and perhaps you weren't expecting to be asked for the text to be read out by you. But invariably, once you have done it, the feedback that we have immediately after the session is how useful it was for you to read the text out loud and how beneficial it was, and that you will use it in future just reading to yourself. So it is very beneficial, and my response would be, if you're nervous, don't knock it until you've tried it, right? In the consultation, there's only you and me, or you and one of my colleagues, or you and a co-author and one of my colleagues. We're not going to laugh and tell everybody about it in the pub later on. If you make a mistake, we're here to correct, we're here to help, right? So it's all about being constructive. Okay. So this is what happens during the consultation. These are the typical problems, and we will make a start going through some of the typical problems. We probably won't have time to go through all of them. We certainly didn't in the previous session, but we'll focus on some of the writing, the main problems with writing. And again, this is what I say when I find out about the text and everything else. The two main problems that we have are punctuation and articles. Generally, the Russian text has fewer commas. Now, a comma is a time signature. It's an instruction to pause. It's an instruction to separate parts of a sentence for logical reasons. A full stop is another time signature, and it's another instruction, and it indicates a longer pause, again, for logical reasons. Paragraph mark, by the same token, even longer pause, different subject, change of subject. So punctuation is perhaps the main most common issue. Russian sentences tend to be quite long. I believe that they're longer than British sentences, and whenever I make this comment, I'm invariably attacked by the writer saying, no, English sentences are much longer, but we can have that argument. The other most common mistake is to do with articles. And again, it's quite understandable that articles don't exist in the Russian language. So the journalist, the writer, the author will come from their learning from school and try to apply articles in the way that they remember. And sometimes they're difficult to understand which article to use when. So we will cover that. All right. Speaking, we'll get onto the pronunciation, and hopefully we'll make some indentations into stress. And if we have time, we can go on to numbers and dates. Let's have a gap fill exercise on articles. So I want you to try to fill out the articles, either a, the, or an, where appropriate. Then we'll go through them. And all of the texts that we use in these exercises, by the way, they're all actual texts which have been submitted. But it's also fair to say that these are extracts from the texts, and that there is some context which you won't be aware of. So it's understandable if you make a mistake. So in the first one, there is the definite article during the years of completing. So what about number 2? During the years of completing PhD, this is what you think? Well, in actual fact, this is the indefinite article. We should say A, during the years of completing a PhD. PhD is obviously an abbreviation. So what we mean by completing PhD is completing a course of PhD study, which may be 3 years or 4 years or whatever. So we would say completing a PhD. We don't use the definite article. We don't say the PhD because there are many and we haven't yet defined it. So we have to use the indefinite article. So during the years of completing a PhD. Okay, number 3, next one. In fact, again, we use the definite article. It's the challenge of completing a PhD, right, that each PhD student faces. So it has been defined, not very precisely, but it has been defined. So we use the definite article. And it's interesting that you say about countable. There are many challenges, but there is only one challenge, I suppose, of completing a PhD. You might have a challenge of completing your master's or your bachelor's or something else, but this is the challenge of, and I say the challenge of completing the PhD. So again, we use the definite article. There are episodes of what? Number 4. We've got 3 blanks, and you're all absolutely correct. Well done. But there are also moments of tedium, distress, and emotions that are far from what? Without as well. So you didn't get caught out by it. Okay, number 6. This is excellent. This is a phenomenon that has been studied more intensively in, and just to repeat, I said that this was some text which had been submitted, and I didn't change this. We're focusing on articles rather than construction. I would have, rather than saying in the last 20 years, I would say over the last 20 years. But again, it's about style. So, you know, I mean, writing, everybody has their own style, and it's neither right nor wrong. It may be acceptable for publication in a journal, and that's down to the editor, but there's nothing wrong with style. So I would say over the last 20 years, it's more familiar, it's more comfortable to my ears, for example. In the last 20 years, as what? And we don't know the evidence, so indefinite. So as a consequence of evidence of an increase in the demand for mental health support at all. Now, we do know that there are levels of higher education. They are known and they are countable. But in this context, in this instance, we don't use any article. We don't need it, right? So at all levels. Again, we could change that to say at every level. Yeah, they are countable, and it's about individual style. But in this context, we say at all levels, we don't need an article. There is awareness of, we would use the. So we're talking about a group, okay? So we know which group it is, and we know the status. So we're talking about the unstable well-being of this group. It's not about potential, because there's an awareness of it, right? So we are aware of it. We are aware of which group it is. So we use the definite article. Based on research data on the experiences of doctoral students around, we know the world. It's interesting to understand the reasons why, and you know, we write, and I understand that, as I say, it's not not native. And one of the questions that I ask the people who come for consultations is, did you write it in Russian and translate it, or did you write it in English? And this often, and it depends on the writer's level of English, whether they can think in English and write, or whether they think, no, I'll write it in Russian and I'll translate it. So there tend to be more article mistakes when it's been written in Russian and translated, as opposed to when it's been written in English. So it's just something to bear in mind when you write a text. So there's the example. So just examples. As we have already discussed, you should know all these already. Shall we go out for a drink this evening? We can't say use a definite article. We can't say use no article. You can say shall we go out to drink, but not shall we go out drink. You could say shall we go out drinking this evening, but shall we go out for a drink this evening? We wouldn't say shall we go out for the drink, because that's what we do. You know, we always go out and have one drink and then come home. That doesn't happen. So shall we go out for a drink this evening? And then you may get a reply, well, let's push the boat out. Let's go for a meal instead. And obviously that implies a meal and a drink, or maybe a meal and a bottle of wine, a meal and several drinks. Let's go for a meal. But it's still a meal. It's not the meal. We haven't decided. We haven't made it concrete. So it's indefinite. Can you think of a restaurant that you'd like to go to? It's up for discussion. It's not been decided. It's not been agreed. It's not been confirmed. So indefinite article. Let's go to an Indian. Still hasn't been decided, right? It's been reduced. The choice has been restricted, but it's not been decided. I fancy Indian food tonight. Let's go to an Indian restaurant. There are 30 Indian restaurants available. We haven't decided, so it's still an indefinite article. Let's go to an Indian. I fancy a curry. They would cry if you said, I want your curry when you went in, because they have about 25 different curries. So it's not defined, it's not clear. And when we go to the shops and we make a curry at home, we go and buy some curry powder. So you can say, I fancy my curry, but if you fancy a curry in an Indian restaurant, there you need to make a decision, right? There will be many different choices. So I fancy a curry. So let's move on to the definite article, continuing the same conversation. Great idea. Let's go to the one we've been to before. Now, if we finish that sentence there before, the one we've been to before, and we said the, that means that we've only ever been to one Indian restaurant, because we're using the definite article. But we haven't finished the sentence, right? The one we've been to before on Prospect Mirror. If we finish the sentence there, that means that there is only one Indian restaurant on Prospect Mirror. But we don't know that. So we need to be more definitive in order to justify the definite article. I think it's called Darbar's. Probably. There is only one restaurant called Darbar's on Prospect Mirror. And as a lover of Indian food, I can confirm that there is only one. So we're right to use the definite article. I love the chicken satay there. Okay, so not the chicken curry. It was my partner who suggested the curry. He fancies the curry. I fancy the chicken satay. Now, I can say the chicken satay because on their menu, they will have chicken satay only once. They're not going to say chicken satay for different things, right? There will be only one chicken satay. So I can say the chicken satay because I have specified which restaurant we're going to. Shall we go in the car? We can use a definite article because we've only got one car, right? So the inference is that we're going to go in our car. Shall we go in the car? We aren't
Okay.
billionaires. We don't have a choice of 15 different cars. Shall we go in the car? Or shall we take the metro or go in a taxi? A taxi, indefinite. There's more than one taxi in the city. There is only one metro. There are many trains on the metro, but the lines will go to where they go to. So we can say we will take the metro, right? And we'll get on at our station near us, and we'll get off at the metro station near the restaurant. So we say the metro. We don't say a metro, but we will say a taxi. Okay. So, as I say, these are typical problems with the with articles. Okay. So next exercise, punctuation. These are, as I said, the two main problems, articles and punctuation with texts. So what I've done, I've taken another piece of text. Part of the problem that I had, and I realized when I was putting this workshop together, is that, as I said at the beginning, the writer submits the text and it's put in the common area, and then we both work on it. So once it's been worked on, hopefully it doesn't have any errors, right? Now, what I should have done for the purposes of this workshop is save the text before we worked on it, and I could have shown you a lot of errors. But what we have is some text which has been completed, and what I've done has been to just remove the commas for the purposes of this exercise. All right, so this text wasn't submitted without any commas. I've changed it for the purposes of this exercise. Now again, it is contextual, and it's an extract from some text, so you don't know what's going on before the text and after the text. So it's perfectly understandable for you not to understand everything and to make mistakes. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to get your head around it, and then we will work out how many commas you would put in this text. I've not changed anything else, so it's only commas that we're interested in. So before we make a start on this, I'll make a couple of comments. Writing, as I say, is a personal style. There aren't rules, but there are guidelines. And your writing style may or may not be acceptable if you want to be published in a journal. So the commas that I've put in they're not actually my style, they're the author's style. And there can be some debate about whether a comma is necessary or not. To repeat what I said earlier, a comma is a time signature, and I tend to equate writing with music. If you imagine a piece of music by Beethoven or Tchaikovsky, on the left there will be a key, a signature key, a time key, whether it's 2/4 or 3/4 or 4/4 or whatever. That's the pace at which the music is played. And I'm sure that you're aware if Tchaikovsky was playing a piece of music and somebody at school was playing the same piece of music, it would sound very different. So delivering text is also very different. There are great narrators and they deliver, and you don't get the opportunity to read the text, but you're listening to them delivering it and you're visualizing. So when you look at a piece of text, the commas and the punctuation, the full stops and the paragraph marks, they're all instructions to you where you should put the stress, how long you should wait before you move on to the next part of the text. So the reason why we've put the comma before and after is that who is Lawrence? He's the author of this book, isn't he? Lawrence is the author of the book, so we need to separate the fact that Lawrence wrote the book, and then we've got a comma telling us which book he wrote in, and before that we tell what Lawrence is actually telling us. So he's defining a term, and we need to tell him to tell the reader which term he is defining. So in order to define the term producer, that's the term, by the way, everybody. Okay, now I've defined the term. In order to define the term, the person who's defining the term, whose name is Lawrence, by the way, so there's a comma, and by the way, he's not telling us, he's written it in a book. So Lawrence in the book, and he's written 15 different books, so I'm going to tell you which book he's written it in, so you want to be a producer. So all separate pieces of information. Now we can miss out some of those bits, right? And this is why we surround them by commas. So we could say, in order to define the term, assuming we knew what the term was beforehand, we could say, in order to define the term, Lawrence refers to the Producers Guild of America. Now, we're giving extra information. We're saying he's defining it in his book and what the book is called and what the term is called, producer. So it is clearer, and we pause by making it perfectly clear. So if you close your eyes, don't read the text, and you just listen, in order to define the term producer, Lawrence in the book, so you want to be a producer, refers to the Producers Guild of America. Do you understand? So that's the purpose of the commas. Let me just say again for the fourth time, it's about personal style. Now, the writer here doesn't put a comma after the PGA brackets and before the which I would have done. Okay, generally, and we'll come to which and that, when to use which, when to use that later. And so which I would have put a comma before, which writes about the producer as a person who is in charge of managing all stages of film or TV production, from the inception of the plot to the release of the final project. So again, another comma after TV production, because it's a separate part. It's extra, right? We could finish the sentence at TV production, but we're just giving some more information about the various stages of film production. I would put a comma before which. He's not writing about a person who happens to be in charge. He's writing about the producer, so we don't need the comma before who. So if we go on to the next sentence, only two commas. The author also draws a parallel between the activity of a producer to the role of an entrepreneur, as the start of a new project can be compared with launching a business from scratch, because it's necessary to simultaneously manage multiple production aspects and engage new ideas and people. So fairly straightforward, three logical parts in that sentence. Again, I don't know this text. Studio Binder is a piece of software, I believe. Maybe it's some kind of thesaurus or dictionary, I don't know, in the film industry. Studio Binder defines a producer as a person that, and here we have a list. Okay, so we understand that we separate items on a list with commas, yes, in a simple list. If it's a complex list, then we would use semicolons. Can you tell me the difference between a simple list and a complex list? I'm going to have a party. I'm going to invite Olga and Olga and Olga and Natasha and Ksenia and Natasha. Okay, so we got three Ksenias, no, three Natashas and three Olgas. I know 15 Olgas. So I need to, one way we could say their family name, okay? But in order to identify which Olga, we could say, I'm going to invite Olga, my colleague. So there we have a complex list, and it would be Olga, comma, my colleague, semicolon, Olga, my sister, right? So Olga, comma, my sister, and then we know which Olgas we're talking about, semicolon, Olga, I don't know, my mother's friend, etc. So that's a difference between a complex list and a simple list. All right. Simple list, we just separate the items with comma. But if we need to use a comma in order to explain the item on the list, then it becomes a complex list and the separator becomes a semicolon, a dot with a comma underneath. So here we have a list. So this person, the producer, they initiate. They also coordinate and also supervise, and they also manage the creation, etc. So the standard rules with lists is that we have a comma between each of the aspects of the list. In this case, it's their verbs. And the separator between the last item on the list and the next to the last item on the list, we use an and. Because of style, some people use an Oxford comma. So they put a comma as well as an and. Personal choice, personal style, absolutely fine. My only comment and advice would be, if you want to use it, then use it, but be consistent. Don't use it sometimes and not other times. Yeah. So in order to read this, and we've actually got two lists in the same sentence, which is great. And this is one of the reasons why I use this bit of text. Studio Binder defines a producer as a person that initiates, coordinates, supervises, and manages the creation and production of movies, television shows, web series, and commercial videos, amongst other productions. So we've got a list. The second list, we've got the four things, all right? The movies, the TV shows, the web series, and the commercial videos. And then we've got a bit more as well. So we've got amongst other productions. We're showing that it's commercial videos, and there may be other items which the producer manages the creation and production of. So we need to show that it's a separate item on the list. And this is a complex sentence with two lists, which is unusual. So let's simplify it in order to clarify the definition. Let's say, let's put a full stop after manages the creation, okay? But let's talk about only the first list. A person that initiates, coordinates, supervises, and manages the creation, okay? If we put a comma after supervises, that would be an Oxford comma. Now, this person does four things. They initiate, they coordinate, they supervise, and they manage. It doesn't matter which order we put them in. We could say they coordinate, manage, initiate, and supervise. We need the and between the last two items. If we put the comma between all of the items and before the and, then that is the Oxford comma. So you could say initiates, comma, coordinates, comma, supervises, Oxford comma, and manages. And you don't need it. It's about personal choice. Now, as I say, it's a bit more complex. If we finish the sentence after videos, and forget the amongst other things, amongst other productions, we have the use of the Oxford comma here. Movies, television shows, movies, comma, television shows, comma, web series, Oxford comma, and commercial videos. Main rule is you have the and between the last two items on a list. We now have handout exercise number 3, sentence reconstruction. Now, one thing that we do have is, as I mentioned before, long sentences. Now, the purpose of a consultation is for us to discuss things with the author. If we look at this sentence, it's a very, very long sentence, and it's a very, very complex sentence. I would say to the author, what do you mean by this? What are you trying to tell me? Because it's very complex, very difficult to understand. So before we discuss it, I want you to make this clearer, right? First of all, break it up into 2 or more sentences and change the wording, right? So that we understand what they're on about. I'm not the author, so don't ask me questions, what do they mean? Because I don't know, right? Let's just look at the text and try to make it simpler. I also put the full stop after measures, and I identified that these are very strange categories, if you like. So patient experience of care measures and clinical process of care measures. And we can see that they've been referred to in the original sentence twice each. So the patient experience of care measures is mentioned on the first line, and on the let's go back, and on the 4th line. And the process of care measures are mentioned on the 2nd line and on the 4th and last lines. So I shortened those, and I just referred to them as both categories in the 2nd instance. She's identified that there is commonality in that they're called of care measures. So even better than me, she's shortened it still, patient experience and clinical process of care measures. So that's an even better step. So very well done.
Yeah. Really well done.
What did you suggest for the 2nd sentence? The original sentence is very, very complex and unnecessary and needs simplifying. So there are ways, and this is what we would do. I mean, as I say, if I heard this the first time, I'd say, okay, stop. I need to process this. I need to understand what on earth you're talking about. Try and explain to me what it is you mean, and let's make it simpler. Let's make it easier to understand. So I'm sure that any journal would reject it as it was originally presented. So useful exercise. Okay, back to commas. Right. Now, what I said was that excluding lists, any part of a sentence, you should be able to remove the part between 2 commas, not in every case, and the sentence should still make sense. So try to identify what parts between two commas can be removed in this sentence, and the sentence still makes sense. So what I put down, wait a minute. We can remove that. We're talking about Trump's approach to human rights called into question. So if we remove it, it says the human rights called into question the US commitment. Yeah, so it still makes sense. Now, I'm not suggesting that we remove it. What I am suggesting is that when we punctuate, we put commas around it so that it can be removed. Yeah, and again, this is for information. By the way, this and this and this and this. All right, so this is what the bits between the commas are. And this is why I say we use many more commas in English language than you guys do in Russian language, right? You have a 15-line sentence and you're struggling for oxygen by the end of it. So to continue, Joe Biden could be removed, but we could also remove the incumbent US president instead of Joe Biden.
You're right, yeah.
So one of those can go. So I did it that way, or I did it that way. Yeah. So guidelines, not rules. Generally, a sentence should not be longer than 3 lines. And if you need to take a breath before you reach the end of the sentence, it's probably too long. And if a sentence is punctuated correctly, you should be able to remove any text between 2 commas. Now that's a very broad brush, right? You can't always do it, but you can't have too many commas. You're breaking something up, and imagine you're reading a bedtime story to a child. So you're giving them time to process what it is you're telling them. They're not reading the text with you, they're just listening to you. So they're visualizing. Okay. Okay. Which verse is that? I told you that we would come on to it. Who can tell me before we go through this? When do we use which and when do we use that? So that is more restrictive, which is loose, which supplies extra information, extraneous, almost unnecessary information. We use that when something is essential for the meaning of the sentence. So try to just fill out these, and as I say, just take a minute and then we'll go through the answers. Okay, so the first one. Okay, so the statement says the question is whether this was or not more than a mere political gesture for the facelifting of US image as a liberal democracy. That's the end of the sentence. By the way, it suffered substantial reputational damages during the previous Trump administration. So I put a which there because we could finish the sentence after democracy. Second one has to be that, because we want the world should and would follow. Number 3. We can stop it. It's extraneous information. Number 4.
That.
Oh, excellent. And finally, number 5. This is where the commas come in, right? So again, anything between 2 commas can be removed. So it's extra information. So there is a which, not a that. So frequently, when we use which, we will have a comma before which. Answers, and these are the general rules.
Yeah.
So that is, as I say, a restrictive clause. So the information is necessary. Yeah. Register for a consultation, bring your text, and we can discuss it. I look forward to seeing you again in the consultations.